What Really Happened with your host, Mike Rivero. You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, where you'll find out what the Fukushima's going on.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Tuesday, February 26th, 2019, getting into the week here. We have lots to talk about today. It's a very busy news day. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, so let's just get right on into it. Obviously, the big news continues to be the escalating situation in Venezuela. The United Nations Security Council is currently holding a meeting on the crisis, and apparently the United States is in there saying that the Security Council should call for new presidential elections in Venezuela. And if Maduro wins again, well, then we'll call for new elections in Venezuela. And if Maduro wins again, we'll call for new elections in Venezuela. And we'll just keep on doing it until those gosh darn Venezuelans elect somebody that we want to have running the country here. So Elliot Abrams, who's our special envoy to Venezuela, and author of the failed coup d'etat against Hugo Chavez, said that Washington would announce more sanctions on Caracas and reintroduce a UN resolution on humanitarian aid. Now, do you see how these two are at cross purposes? Okay. And by the way, they're laying on the propaganda really, really thick. I saw a clip on TV about how those Venezuelans, they're eating out of trash trucks. Well, that trash truck looked pretty full to me. And doesn't it make sense that if they don't have anything to eat at all, there isn't going to be anything going into the trash truck? Just got to think these things through here. So the U.S. is vowing to intensify efforts to deliver what they're calling humanitarian aid. And it's basically a violation of Venezuela's sovereignty. And that's exactly how Maduro sees it. And aid is coming on in. And by the way, we all recognize this. We've seen it before. Oh, those poor people, we must intervene. Those poor Syrians, those poor Libyans, those poor Yemenites, those poor Venezuelans. Yeah, what about the Palestinians, huh? When do we intervene on their behalf? Now, right now, self-proclaimed El Presidente Juan Guaido is over in Bogota, Colombia, meeting with Mike Pence and other U.S. officials to basically ask for the liberation of Venezuela, which means steal it away from its elected government and give it to him. And he will share the goodies with the United States corporations here. But he may be in trouble because he was under a travel ban from the Venezuelan Supreme Court. And that violation carries with it a rather severe prison term. So he may not be able to go back to Venezuela until this whole shindig is all the way over. And it's going to be very hard for him to motivate the opposition speaking from another country. So we'll see what's going to happen. Meanwhile, the United States is already violating Venezuelan airspace. A Boeing RC-135V reconnaissance aircraft has been spotted over Venezuela. And this is being reported, Sputnik News. Something to remember from the past in Venezuela, and it goes back to Hugo Chavez. George W. Bush invented the term misunderestimating, and that's what the U.S. has continually done with Venezuela. And looking back at the 2002 coup attempt, there was an interview with Hugo Chavez. He said the U.S. thought it could easily replace him. And of course, he was out of power for a grand total of 2 days. And Pedro Carmona, the usurper, was quickly forgotten. Chavez lasted another decade, and his movement is still in power today. So something very similar may have happened on Saturday as Maduro resisted a concerted international effort to bring him down. Now, it's not really an international effort. It's the United States and everybody who tags along saying, yes, Master United States, yes, Master United States, yes, Master United States. So Mike Pence is down there in Bogota, Colombia, and he's out there saying, Nicolas Maduro must go. He's out there talking tough here. Okay, Mike, here's your rifle. Here's your parachute. Here's your day-glow orange jumpsuit left over from the CIA's torture centers because we ran out of the jungle camo. Watch your head climbing into that transport plane, and we're going to call Maduro and tell him you are on your way to kick his butt all by yourself. But we, the American people, have had enough war. We're tired of seeing our kids go off and coming back in body bags or wheelchairs. We're tired of seeing the money that we work hard to produce vanish from our pockets, and nothing comes back to our communities. Our infrastructure is decaying. The roads are cracked. The bridges are crumbling. The dams are getting ready to fail. We've had it with this wartime economy. Enough is enough is enough. If these oil companies want that oil field in Venezuela, let them pay for the war. Let their children go down and fight the battles. We're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. Now, one of the groups that the United States was counting on for political support to get Maduro out was the Lima Group. And apparently they didn't get it. Yesterday, Peru's Vice Foreign Minister Hugo de Zella Martinez stated that the use of force in any of its forms is unacceptable, and the use of force is not a solution for what's happening in Venezuela. So Pence and Guaido failed to secure Lima Group approval for a U.S. military intervention in Venezuela, which isn't going to stop the U.S. They're going to go on in anyway. Now, Maduro's accusing the U.S. of attempting to fabricate a crisis justifying a war in South America. And went on out to say that everything the United States government has done has been doomed to failure. They're not doing all that well over in the Middle East. They're trying to fabricate a crisis to justify political escalation and military intervention in Venezuela to bring a war to South America. All right, we're going to take a phone call. Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha, Dustin. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, Mike, we're supposed to be all like the world leader of peace. We're trying to overthrow Venezuela, and we got a real crisis going on in India and Pakistan right now.
Yes,
and
we do.
I didn't hear anybody talking. Is anybody talking about it on like the news or any Trump? Did he come out and say
I'm not
anything
hearing.
about it?
I haven't seen anything on the corporate media. I'm not even seeing all that much about Venezuela. In fact, they're all talking about, Trump is over there in Vietnam getting ready to meet with Kim Jong-un. But yeah, after we're done with Venezuela, we're going to be talking about India and Pakistan because that is a very, very serious situation.
I got some real quick news that they went into Pakistani territory over the line of control with 12 Mirage 2000I planes using Sukhoi Su-30s as cover.
Yes.
And Pakistan now is saying they're going to retaliate.
Yes.
So this is a dangerous situation. But I'll listen to the rest of your show, Mike. Have a good show.
All right. Thanks an awful lot here. All righty. So here in the United States, you can just see the drool coming down the chins of the war hawks. And as you know, last week, Marco Rubio tweeted out what amounts to a death threat against Maduro. And he basically tweeted out a before and after picture of former Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi, who was the victim of yet another U.S.-backed coup d'etat and was literally mutilated to death in the streets. And basically that's the message. Either leave or the same thing will happen to you. Okay, the Russian Security Council is saying that the United States is amassing special ops in Puerto Rico and the army in Colombia to oust Maduro, and very clearly is getting ready to intervene in Venezuela and topple its leader. So, Nikolai Patrushev told Russian media on Tuesday. He says the relocation of American Special Forces units to Puerto Rico, the deployment of the U.S. Army units to Colombia, and other facts evidently show the Pentagon is enhancing its military in the region to use it to oust Maduro. One critical thing to watch out for, naval deployments. Looking for transports and warships to depart U.S. Navy bases along the eastern seaboard and sail into the Caribbean. Because, again, looking at a map, Venezuela, Caracas is not all that far from the coastline. It's not a direct line. There's a mountain range in the way. But that would be the shortest route to get after Maduro himself, as opposed to coming across country from Colombia. Of course, I'm sure that Maduro himself is not going to be in Caracas just waiting to be chopped up. So we'll see what's going to happen. And again, the arms smuggling is already underway. According to this report by McClatchy, a North Carolina-based freight company has been implicated in an arms smuggling operation to Venezuela, shipping arms to rebels in the country. And after the McClatchy report came out, the company halted all flights to the country. So yeah, same format, same recipe, same playbook that we've seen so many times before. Now, I reposted that Max Blumenthal video about him touring a supermarket in Caracas, because yesterday we had somebody call on in and say, oh, well, sure, maybe they've got lots of food in the markets, but nobody can afford to buy it because of the incredible hyperinflation. So I went back and I looked at the video, and by golly, there's plenty of customers inside that store. Now, we know that the U.S. government tells lies to get us to go along with a war. The people are starving, the people are being gassed, the people are under a tyrant, the people don't have democracy, blah, 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 blah. So, and again, does it really make sense for the United States to throw more sanctions onto Venezuela and then demand that U.S. humanitarian aid be allowed in? All right, turning to India and Pakistan, this is a very serious situation. Apparently, India flew across the line of control and bombed what they are saying is a terrorist camp. Apparently, it was a bombing mission. They used Mirage 2000 fighters, or strike fighters, and destroyed this major terrorist camp. Now, the Pakistani army spokesman is saying, you ran away, now wait for our surprise. So they're talking about retaliation, and this could get out of control. Remember what Gandhi used to say, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, and soon the whole world is blind and toothless? Well, the reason he came up with that is because it is a cultural thing in that part of the world to seek equal for equal. And where we're dealing with the problem, of course, is that both India and Pakistan have nuclear weapons. So, alrighty, story coming out of Sputnik News. Kashmir crisis from hybrid war to hot war. It certainly seems to be going that way. And, of course, India and Pakistan have different interpretations about what happened. India believes Pakistan was behind this terrorist bombing. Pakistan has denied it. But everybody's listening to their own ideas and polishing up those weapons. And Pakistan is saying that India is trying to scapegoat Pakistan to cover up for their own domestic problems in the region, of which they have many. Jared Kushner apparently is one of the major forces behind this multi-million-dollar plan to give the Saudis nukes. Now, ostensibly what they're talking about are nuclear reactors. And I think they're trying to basically dive on in there ahead of the Russians, because the Russians were negotiating with Saudi Arabia about building them some nuclear power stations as they did up in Iran. And Saudi Arabia, like Iran, understands the oil is not going to last forever, and it's worth more to them on a tanker ship or a pipeline being sold to another country than burned up to make their own electricity. So they want to make a big investment in nuclear power. And the U.S. wants to get on in there and no, don't do business with the Russians. You'll do business with us instead. So this big push, and there was this committee formed of the executives of 6 companies: Exelon Corporation, Toshiba American Energy Systems, Bechtel Corporation, Centrus Energy Corporation, GE Energy Infrastructure, and Siemens USA. And they all signed a letter to Deputy Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, basically presented the Iron Bridge program as a 21st century Marshall Plan for the Middle East. Now, Trump is behind all of this because the Saudis were very generous supporters in 2016. He's going to need them in 2020. Where the concern is, of course, is that if, in fact, they're going to be given the standard uranium fission reactors, which is what GE makes, that's what they had over there in Fukushima, it makes bomb stuff. Saudi Arabia is going to have the material to make nuclear weapons. And once you have that, the weapons-grade uranium or the plutonium, making the actual bomb itself is not that hard, especially the uranium bomb. It's basically just a metal pipe with two chunks of weapons-grade uranium at each end. Slap them together, it goes bang. That's it. Plutonium bomb, a little more complicated. You've got that compression jacket to increase the density of the plutonium, and you have to have the initiator at the core and everything. And no, I'm not going to give out all the secrets on how to make a plutonium bomb here. But it is concerning that the United States, which has signed and ratified the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, all of a sudden is out there saying, here, you get a nuke, and you get a nuke, and you get a nuke. I'm sure that Israel, even though they have apparently covertly been friends with Saudi Arabia for some time now, I'm not sure that Israel's going to be entirely happy with this deal. Okay, now, over in Israel, the IDF has launched a 3-day surprise military war drill along the Gaza Strip border, simulating various military maneuvers, including a full-blown war in Gaza. I don't think I like the looks of that. Now, maybe this is just to get the protesters to shut up and go home, because Israel realizes the world is watching the Great March of Return, and the world's opinion is, swinging away from Israel and toward the Palestinians. No matter how much Israel screams, Holocaust, 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 people are looking at Palestine and saying, whatever happened in the Holocaust, whatever that was supposed to be, happened before I was born. What is going on in Palestine is happening right here, right today, right before our eyes. This is something we can do something about. Meanwhile, the Israeli Minister of Agriculture, Uri Ariel, once again stormed the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound, and head of the PR office at the Islamic Endowment Department, Firas Al-Dibs, said Ariel headed a group of Israeli settlers into the compound via the Mughrabi Gate, which had been under Israeli control since the occupation of Jerusalem in 1967. And Al-Dibs pointed out that Ariel took footage of the Al-Rama Gate, which is the Gate of Mercy prayer area that was opened recently after the Palestinians removed Israeli locks on it and entered the area. So they're provoking. On one side, you have the Israeli army rehearsing for war in Gaza, and on the other side, you've got Israeli officials trying to provoke Muslims by going into their holy sites. Yesterday evening, Israeli soldiers shot 3 young Palestinian men with live fire. They're in a hospital. Apparently, the soldiers opened fire at dozens of Palestinian protesters on lands near the perimeter fence, in addition to firing many high-velocity gas bombs at them. All right. Now, a lot of people are still talking about the upcoming Israeli elections, and in the category of politics makes for strange bedfellows, they're still talking about how Netanyahu has basically formed a new political party by going to the extreme ultra-right, the Kahanists, who are so radical and racist that even AIPAC says this is a bad idea. But it's a desperation move, because Benny Gantz's new blue and white party, they're ahead in the polls by quite a wide margin. So it's going to be kind of interesting to see what happens. Okay, we're up on a commercial break. We're going to take a few minutes here, listen to some commercials, make some money, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. And folks, Republic Broadcasting really does need your help. Things are tightening up. Equipment is wearing out. Nobody in independent media is getting rich. The people who lie to you, they're the ones who get the big bucks. Saddam has nuclear weapons. Okay, here's a check. Assad is gassing his people. Okay, here's another big check. So that's the way it really works. And we're trying to basically head off this disastrous rush toward what is shaping up to be a world war in which not only your sons but your daughters are going to be drafted. And there's the real possibility of nuclear weapons being used. In fact, we ended World War II with nuclear weapons. We could easily start World War III with nuclear weapons, especially with India and Pakistan. So, trying to make light of the situation, but it is serious, and Republic Broadcasting needs your help. So, the postal address where you can send a check, money order, or if you prefer anonymity cash, is Republic Broadcasting Network, 2251 Double Creek Drive, number 302, Round Rock, Texas, 78664. The phone number where you can make a credit or debit card donation or pledge to be a recurring subscriber is 800-724-2719, extension 1 during business hours, extension 3 at all other times. And a reminder, there is no such thing as too small a donation. A lot of times I'll get an email saying, I'd like to donate, but I could only spare $5. And I write back and say, $5 is fine. We can get a patch cord for $5. So again, the network thanks you. All right, let's take a phone call from Joe in Oklahoma. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Mike, I've talked to you before on several occasions, and you keep bringing up about propaganda.
Yes.
And do you have a pencil? I hope you'll take note of this, because you're probably aware of it, but I think people need to be reminded of it frequently. House Resolution 5736 was passed in 2012. It's called the Domestic Dissemination of Propaganda.
Yeah, I remember that one.
Okay.
It made it legal for the government to lie to the American people. Not that the government hadn't been lying all along, but there were actually laws in place that said the government wasn't supposed to propagandize the American people, only foreigners. And this House resolution basically took off the brakes and said,
that's correct.
In that law, the government is basically admitting, we are lying to you. And if you're a loyal American, you will believe the propaganda and you won't listen to anybody else's opinion, because we're moving forward for the New World Order.
Just from my perspective, though, that needs to be thrown out to people every once in a while to remind them, and so they'll remember to pass it on to those people that you speak of that believe that the government wouldn't lie to us. That Mike Pompeo and what's his name from Venezuela? That's
Maduro. Guido.
No, Elliot Abrams. They would never lie to us, nor would Ollie North. Unless it just is so sickening. But I just offer that to put that on your paper to throw out to people about every day. Thank you, and you're doing a good job, bud. Thanks.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go here. And, of course, at this stage in the history of this country, I think pretty much most Americans know they're being lied to by the corporate media and by the government. The approval numbers, the trust numbers in all the polls indicate that. I can imagine the only people who are still totally trusting of the government and media are those who don't know how to use modern electronic devices. Retirees, possibly, I don't know. But it's a small percentage. Getting on back to Israel, you're going to love this one. A lot of people equate the conditions the Palestinians are living in to the old Jim Crow South. It's apartheid. There's no question about that. Representative Rashida Tlaib did so. So has Jimmy Carter, who grew up in segregated Georgia. Alabama native Condoleezza Rice also said it. Just last week, Angela Davis said in Birmingham, Palestinians were an inspiration to black people in the civil rights struggle. So along comes Senator Kamala Harris saying that the segregated South is a basis for her love for Israel. She actually came on out and said that, saying that the famous Civil Rights March in 1965 across the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama, was a guide to her building a bridge with Israel supporters. that's a bit of a reach. But, we're coming up on the APAC conference, and everybody's sort of polishing off their I got to suck up to Israel act. Apparently, there is a new package of grants to Israel that would be even more than the $38 billion they're already getting. And of course, the $38 billion is on book. There's a lot of off book support for Israel as well. We got to take another break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And we're talking about Israel, and we're talking about how Congress is just throwing them more money. And the House of Representatives, in their version of the bill, includes a provision that forces the American president to give Israel a minimum of $3.8 billion per year. That is one of the stupidest things the House could be doing. Not because of the money, because it basically removes any control. The only influence the United States has over Israel is to say, well, we're going to pull back on the money that we give you. And the House of Representatives is saying, no, the president can't do that anymore. You will send them the money, and this may actually be unconstitutional. But that's what the House of Representatives is saying. Okay, they're going to get the money, and no matter what they do. So that is just insane. All right, let's talk about our domestic politics. There's a lot going on here. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, shortly after she won her congressional seat, she was out there with a GoFundMe saying that she didn't have enough money to get an apartment in Washington, D.C. Because she wasn't going to start getting a paycheck until, Congress actually convened. And she's been photographed in this little two-bedroom apartment, and it turns out it's a little bit of a fraud, because I'm looking at this story that came out of Fox News, and apparently Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez owns a home she inherited from her father, and it's a mortgage-free fourth-floor condo in Parkchester. And according to neighbors around that little two-bedroom apartment, the only time she ever shows up is for a photo op. So she's already out there trying to cultivate a new image of herself, that she's just one of us. And already she's proving that she is not. Okay. Apparently, an IRS investigator in California has admitted leaking confidential details of financial transactions by former Trump attorney Michael Cohen to Michael Avenatti, the lawyer for Stormy Daniels. Now, this IRS investigator, John C. Fry, has been charged in federal court with searching for and disseminating suspicious activity reports filed by banks when they note potentially suspicious transactions. And federal officials are saying they found records that indicate Fry placed a phone call from his personal cell phone to that of Avenatti the day before Avenatti released details of Cohen's financial transactions, and the day after. Now, Cohen himself right now is testifying behind closed doors, so we'll have to wait to see what's going to come out of that, if anything. Well, the Jussie Smollett situation is kind of winding down. I mean, he's still going to have his day in court. But Professor John McWhorter of Columbia University was on CNN and basically saying Smollett saw the hate hoax as a path to greater fame than his acting alone could achieve. Yeah, that's the whole point of a hate crime hoax, is to attract attention for yourself or your agenda. And this Professor McWhorter is saying this exemplifies our current victimhood culture, where the more victimized you are, the higher your social status. And that is an absolute inverse from the culture we had when I was just starting to grow up, where you wanted to be stronger, smarter, brighter, faster, taller than everybody else. And that was your social status. I think it's absolutely pathological to have a culture in which the most revered people, the most honored people, the most iconized people are the ones who claim the greatest victimhood. And Smollett was right in there, black, gay, Jewish. So he's just ticking off the little boxes here. Oh, got beaten up. All right, that's another score. He's climbing that victimhood ladder. Steve Scalise is basically on the warpath against Democrats for this new round of abortion laws in multiple states, in which if the baby survives the abortion and is born alive, they can just go ahead and kill it. Now, to me, that is infanticide. It is homicide. There was an attempt to pass a bill in Congress saying that if the baby was born alive, it had to be treated as a human being and given proper medical care. That one got voted down, mostly by the Democrats. So there's a mixed message there. The Democrats are just welcoming for all these immigrants and refugees coming into this country, but by golly, anybody who's already in this country, you know, who's about to be born, get rid of them. Just get rid of them here. Actor James Woods tweeted after Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez responding to her tweet that she was in charge and she was the boss. And Woods came on out and said, "You may have missed this, but the way it works in America is you work for us. The last time somebody told Americans to sit down and shut up was 1776. If you learn to read, look it up. You are not only an idiot, you're an arrogant idiot, and there is nothing more dangerous." And he's absolutely right. And there are way too many arrogant idiots in Congress. People who are out there just full of themselves and swelled with their ego, who don't really know what they're talking about. Mazie Hirono, Hawaii's own Mazie Hirono, actually did not know it's illegal to walk across our border without the government's permission. Okay. Eric Swalwell reacted to NRA claims that Democrats are targeting gun owners by suggesting that the NRA is calling for Nancy Pelosi to be assassinated. And Swalwell referred to an article in the NRA's American Rifleman. The title of the article claims Democrats are using law-abiding gun owners for legislative target practice. The NRA article says congressional Democrats target gun owners for persecution with extreme firearm transfer bans. But, you know, I think the NRA actually has a defamation case against Eric Swalwell, because nowhere did they suggest assassinating anybody, least of all Nancy Pelosi. All right, over at UC Berkeley, remember last week there was this incident where there was this conservative activist who was just standing there handing out leaflets with his sign and his Make America Great Again hat, and he was attacked by a liberal who was literally screaming, "You're promoting violence, you're promoting violence, you're promoting violence," all the while pounding on him. It was caught on video, and because of the video, they have identified a potential suspect, and it turns out the suspect does not attend UC Berkeley. He's not a student. Somebody who came in from the outside to cause a ruckus, an agent provocateur. And probably right now in the current job market, a lot of people are looking for jobs like that here. Democrats are now pushing to lower the voting age from 18 to 16 in local, state, and federal elections. And their talking point is they want to get more young people involved in the voting process. The reality is that young people are easier to indoctrinate in those schools, and younger people tend to vote Democrat. So again, they're trying to load up the voting rolls in advance of 2020. Okay, good old Elon Musk. Remember last summer he had that tweet where he claimed he'd secured funding for the buyout of Tesla at $420 per share, and it turned out that was not accurate, and the Securities and Exchange Commission took him to task. And there was a court-ordered settlement. And apparently Musk has broken that settlement, and they're looking at holding him in contempt of court. I mean, this is such a complex guy. I mean, on the one side, you've got SpaceX, which is doing all this amazing stuff. And then you've got Tesla, which came up with a really good car. And I don't know if Elon Musk has just reached that stage in his evolution, if you will, where his ego is just getting the better of him because of all that he's done. But to me, it almost looks like he's on the edge of self-destructing, that he's just going to self-immolate. He needs to calm down and get his focus back. He needs to decide what he wants to do. That's his problem. Elon Musk is a Renaissance man. He's interested in doing everything. And I know because when I was a kid, exactly the same way. I was into rock collecting and butterfly collecting and astronomy and music and beekeeping and all the rest of that stuff. And Elon needs to basically decide what it is that matters most and focus on that. Right now, for me, stopping World War III is most important, and I don't do that other stuff anymore. But that's what Elon Musk needs to do. Personally, if I were Elon Musk, I would sell Tesla and I would be focusing on SpaceX because they're out there. They're on the edge of getting America back out into space here. Over in Europe, the French government is sounding the alarm that a new economic or financial crisis across the entire Eurozone could start in Italy due to the weakness of their banks. And we know the Italian banks have been in trouble for quite a long time now. U.S. housing inventory is ramping. Now prices have to come down, way down. And as a matter of fact, home sales have collapsed in Sacramento County. So you're going to have a lot of people whose property values are going to plunge below what they owe on the mortgages. It's called politely being underwater. That was what led us into the meltdown of 2008. It looks like we're heading into a repeat. And the reason we're heading into a repeat is because nobody learned any lessons from the 2008 meltdown. Nobody suffered for it except Lehman Brothers and the American taxpayer. Congress keeps saying, yeah, we can trust the banking industry to regulate itself. They learned their lesson. They'll be good this time. I don't think so. Now, China is lending billions to Venezuela so the government can keep running. They're trying to keep them afloat to basically stand up to these sanctions coming in from the United States. And what's going to happen here? Well, unless the United States does invade Venezuela and installs Guaido, Venezuela under Maduro is going to pivot toward China because China is being their friend and the United States is being their enemy. The U.S.-China trade talks have hit a little bit of a snag. Last Friday, of course, there was this spike on the yuan on trade optimism. And they're talking about having a deal on currency manipulation. There's only one problem. They're not sure how to enforce it. Now, in a world where nations can trust each other, that wouldn't really be that much of a problem. But enforcement, that's going to be a big issue here. Okay, Mohammed bin Salman is up in China. He's struck a $10 billion refinery deal. And as part of that deal, Chinese is now going to be taught in all Saudi schools. So Saudi Arabia is now pivoting away from the United States and toward China. The United States is an empire in decline, and the government did it to themselves. One bad policy decision after the other, all of it fueled by ego, hubris, arrogance, and this idea that we're indispensable. We're invincible. We cannot be beaten. We've never lost a war. Well, we didn't win in Korea, and we did lose in Vietnam. And the reality is, we pretty much lost in both Syria and Afghanistan. Trump is now threatening a second embargo of Cuba. And the way he's doing it is they're basically going to allow Cubans, Cuban citizens who fled to this country when the Cuban government nationalized their property. They're going to be able to bring lawsuits against the U.S. and foreign companies that profited from the nationalized property. So again, poking at Cuba, poking at Cuba. All righty, let's see. Let's take a phone call from Joe in Tennessee. Aloha, Joe. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. I called like last week or so about the Amazon not going into New York.
Yes.
And I thought it was a slam dunk, like everybody in New York would be upset about it. Well, I've been talking to a few people, and for reasons of traffic or they're not using union labor, I got to say I'm surprised, but most people I've talked to are glad. And it just took me aback because I thought, I know in Tennessee a $150,000 job would be, a huge opportunity. But I guess the people in New York don't want to deal with the traffic and the headaches and the higher rents, and the non-union labor is a big part of it.
I'm sure that was a big part of it. That's a big part of it. Plus, the reality is there was no guarantee how many jobs Amazon was going to do, because in all of their other fulfillment centers and stuff, they're moving more and more to robots.
Well, I got to say, I got a term for these people. They're anti-progress progressives, but I guess some people don't want that kind of progress because maybe they're right.
Well, not all progress is good. When the giant big box stores first showed up, like the Walmarts and the Sam's Club, everybody said this is progress, and then all of a sudden all the small neighborhood mom and pop businesses were driven out of business. And so there's always a dark side to progress. Somebody somewhere does get hurt. And
I just wanted to call and let you know. I guess I thought that people would be upset about her and Amazon not being there, but most
some
of the people I know.
Some of them are, but what's tamping it down now is Amazon's announcement that they've canceled plans for a second headquarter anyway, because they're anticipating a slowdown. Anyway, thanks a lot, Joe. We're going to let you go. We're coming up here on a commercial break. We're going to take a few seconds to listen to some words of wisdom. What am I saying? They're not words of wisdom. These are ad agencies. Anyway, we're going to take a few minutes to listen. We'll be right back with more political news. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And over at Boeing, their board of directors has nominated Nikki Haley, former South Carolina governor and former ambassador to the United Nations, to serve as a director on the board of directors. This would add corporate governance to her political experience. She's sort of building her resume. In other words, we're going to see more of her in the future. And apparently shareholders will vote on the nomination at the company's annual meeting on April 29th. Pardon me. So, yeah, if you think a board of directors are a bunch of people who are really very good at what they do, not always. Sometimes they'll go for celebrity, star power. And that was how I got to meet Neil Armstrong, because he had been voted a director on the board of directors of Taft Entertainment, which had bought Hanna-Barbera, where I was working at the time on a computerized ink and paint system. And they came through on a tour, and all of us were saying, God, that guy looks just like Neil Armstrong. And then his wife leans over and says, that's because that is Neil Armstrong. So we all got to meet and talk with him. Anyway, getting on back here. Speaking of celebrities and star power, we had the Oscars this last Sunday, which has been denounced as perhaps the least funny and most PC Oscars ever. And I still haven't seen the overnight numbers. I'm not even sure I want to look, but I'm going to assume that hardly anybody watched them. What was really interesting, though, was to see all these celebrities that, they're flanked by bodyguards, security, metal detectors, physical barriers, walls, fences, and then they get up there on that stage to condemn borders and walls. And there's the concept of a wall is a means to provide security and protection. No, it really doesn't work. And meanwhile, of course, they're surrounded by all this high-tech surveillance and armed guards. And then, of course, after the Oscars, they went up to the after parties at multi-million-dollar mansions surrounded by walls. Story coming on out of Seeing Red As. And apparently there was an incident where a group of U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement agents were dropping off illegal aliens at a Phoenix Greyhound bus station last Saturday. And numerous buses arrived to pick up the illegals who crossed from Mexico. And the report further states that members of a local church set up tables with soup, muffins, and an assortment of fruit near the Buckeye Road station to feed the illegal aliens while mapping out warm places they can stay. It's a safe bet that none of the good church folks were bringing any of the illegals back into their own homes. Now, a spokesman for Immigration and Customs Enforcement confirmed the agency dropped the illegal invaders at the bus station, saying the organizations it normally works with couldn't accommodate them. Well, who is paying for these bus tickets? And who is deciding where these illegal immigrants are going? Because if I am correct, they're being fed into political districts that are just slightly red, like they did for the midterms. We'll be back after station identification. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. And the phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Democrats are out there saying that if Donald Trump uses military money to build the wall, even though at this point it's unallocated, they're saying, there might be a need for it down the road. So military projects are at risk. And of course, right now, the House Democrats voted on a measure to basically overturn Donald Trump's border wall emergency order. And I think the vote actually happened. And I'm trying to get the actual vote count, but I think the measure passed. Now, the Senate is looking at a similar measure. They're not in a rush to get it to the floor. So we're going to see what's happening there. And apparently, the ammunition that the Democrats had was a list of military projects in the districts of various key representatives that they said would be casualties of the White House decision. In other words, if you don't block the wall, then military contracts into your district will be ended, and your constituents will be unhappy. That's what they did here. So the Department of Defense said no decisions have been made regarding specific projects. But that was it. Again, it's always about the money. That Pentagon is huge amounts of money going on out. And senators and members of the House, they'll scramble to get it, and they'll scramble to keep it. Acting Defense Secretary Patrick Shanahan said Saturday after visiting the border, the government needs a broader, more effective approach to border control. How do we get out of treating the symptoms and get at the root of the issue, Shanahan said in an interview while flying back to Washington. I have an idea. How about enforcing Title VIII? Because that's the root of the issue. We have laws that say it is a crime to step across that border without permission, that it is a crime to aid anybody who steps across that border, to feed them, to drive them, to shelter them, certainly to employ them. These are all crimes. If we enforce those laws, the problem goes away. Up in Wisconsin, Governor Tony Evers has issued an executive order withdrawing the state's National Guard troops from the southern border. And he came out with a tweet saying there is no evidence of a crisis at the border and thus no justification for having troops there. And by the way, yes, he's a Democrat. He tweeted out, there is simply not ample evidence to support the president's contention of a national security crisis at our southwestern border. Therefore, there is no justification for the ongoing presence of the Wisconsin National Guard personnel at the border. Okay, now, we have these Democrats, this Wisconsin Democrat, we have the Democrats in the House of Representatives. And I want them all, I would like them all to think about something. I want you to think about something. The United States is about to go to war with Venezuela. And if Bolton has his way, Nicaragua and Cuba, and the Democrats think our southern border should be left unguarded? I don't think so. When these wars crank up, there are going to be Venezuelans and Nicaraguans and Cubans trying to get into our country to do bad things. Asymmetric warfare. And so this push to keep the borders open and load up the country with Democratic voters for 2020, it poses a military risk. It's just insane. Alrighty, over in Great Britain, Theresa May has announced she plans to rule out no-deal Brexit. Okay, there'll be a Brexit with a deal, or there'll be no Brexit. And that means there's going to be a delay. And now they're saying the delay could be until 2021 to do away with the need for what's called the Irish backstop. So under the latest thinking in Brussels, Britain's 21-month transition period after exit day on March 29th would be scrapped for continuing membership instead. In other words, Brexit is going to be delayed indefinitely. I think the British people ought to start putting on their yellow vests here. Meanwhile, as you know, the elections in Europe are coming up in May, and European Union parties, Eurosceptic parties, are set to gain a third of European parliamentary votes. And it's going to basically lock up the system. The Eurosceptics could paralyze Brussels if they win that many seats. It's the rise of populism. This whole globalism, and we're all sharing the planet together and being PC together, it's not working out. All right, we're going to do a shout out now to our honor affiliates who are just now rejoining our network here. As you know, we just had the World Government Summit, during which the globalists were pushing for UN Agenda 30. Now, it used to be Agenda 21. It's been a little bit delayed. Now it's Agenda 30, but it's basically the same thing. Technocratic globalism. Everybody, no more private ownership of cars. Everybody's on mass transit. Just this whole liberal utopia dream. And, of course, the corporate media really didn't report on any of this. Apparently, Putin had a cabinet meeting when his minister came back from Davos and basically said Davos was a dud, that nothing really got accomplished. Everybody was just, talking at each other. I think that whole New World Order idea is falling apart, really. Oh, you're going to love this next story. We're into the realm of political correctness. Over in Chicago, they have a database that they use to track gang activity in order to basically try and keep it under control. They have now deleted it because of complaints that the database was racially unbalanced and that there were far more people of color on it than white people. Well, I have a newsflash for you. White people don't tend to get into gangs. A few of them do, but it's not really part of our culture. And so in the name of political correctness and anti-racism, Chicago threw away one of its most powerful tools for tracking gang activity. And by the way, Chicago is not the only city who's done this. At some point, somebody's going to have to say, we have to make a choice between pandering to all the liberals' ideas of racist-free, gender-free, bias-free, and make a choice about actually getting things done. Because our nation is grinding to a halt. Down in Georgia, as you know, they just passed a bill allowing for constitutional carry. And so, of course, the gun grabbers are out there saying, no, you've got to repeal this law. There's going to be a school shooting any day now. And, of course, the gun grabbers, they want civilian disarmament. They're not interested in gun safety. Because when the civilian population is disarmed, crime goes up and violence goes up. Okay, Donald Trump has given the pro-life movement a little bit of a boost on Friday. He is planning to cut off millions of dollars to Planned Parenthood and other abortion providers with a final rule revising the revamped Title X program. The new rule prohibits the use of Title X funds to perform, promote, refer for, or support abortion as a method of family planning, according to the Department of Health and Human Services website. And, of course, the pro-abortion people are up in arms. You know, this is about a woman's body and freedom. Well, all he's saying is they can't advertise abortion. But there are all these women's groups and feminist groups. They're out there pushing for it. It's one of the things I don't like about liberals. They keep demanding that things be done, but somebody else pays for it here. Now, do you remember last year there was this big stink over these identical twins that were born in China, and they had been gene edited to be resistant to HIV, and the doctor who did it got into some trouble, but apparently they're still sick. What have we got here? And now it turns out Lulu and Nana, okay, may also have been born with markedly superior mental abilities linked to that same gene edit. Because researchers confirmed that deleting the CCR5 gene, which was the modification performed on the girl's DNA, significantly improves cognition, learning, and memory in mice and men. Now, that does sound like a good thing, and it is a good thing. We need more smart people in this world. But it is a reminder of the dangers of tinkering with DNA. It is so self-referential. That's how it packs that much information into such a tiny, tiny space. Everything references everything else. And you can't change one aspect of that genome without unpredictable and potentially harmful results elsewhere. So I hope they proceed slowly with this. Okay, over in Wisconsin, there was this small business, and they had internet service from Frontier, and the service was really bad, apparently even worse than Spectrum. Very slow when it was there, not even there a lot of time. So the small business canceled the contract and said, we can't use this. Frontier turned around and demanded a $4,300 cancellation fee. I can see a lawsuit growing over that one. But it reveals the arrogance of some of these internet companies. They'll go on out there and they'll advertise, we've got this, we've got that. They'll sell you the service. It's not what you're paying for. We're dealing with that with Spectrum. And then when you complain, it's like, well, we don't really need you all that much anyway, and you can cancel, and you got to give us more. Consumer protection has all but gone in this country, and it's another sign of our encroaching fascism here. Okay, the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers, otherwise known as ICANN, declared after an emergency meeting there is an ongoing and significant risk to key parts of the infrastructure that affects the domains on which websites reside. And specifically, it's much more intense than it has been in the past. The malicious activity is targeting the domain name system, or DNS. This is the system that will take the name of a website, like whatreallyhappened.com, and map it to the IP address of the physical computer on which the website is running. But if people can get into the DNS lookup tables, they can send traffic elsewhere to a spoof site or engage in man-in-the-middle attacks. And that's already happened a few times, but apparently somebody's getting ready to do it on a large, large level. Okay. Fire-resistant foam used in sofas and vinyl flooring are poisoning children. This apparently is a problem in public housing where these materials are commonplace. And these are chemicals known as PBDEs, are linked to neurodevelopmental delays, obesity, endocrine and thyroid disruption, cancer, and other diseases. But hey, at least the sofa didn't burn down. Now, Dr. Heather Stapleton of Duke University, who presented the findings at the American Association for the Advancement of Science, warned that despite attempts to curb these chemicals, they are still pervasive. And aspect of life in the United States today, that corporations are selling products that are toxic and harmful, and they just shrug their shoulders and make their money, and the government looks the other way. After the Virginia Governor Ralph Northam scandal revealing his presumed support of infanticide, Democrats should be trying to distance themselves from even the suggestion that they support infanticide if an abortion fails. And unfortunately, they went the opposite. There was this, we referenced this before in the show, the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act. It guarantees babies who are born from a botched abortion get the same life-saving medical care any baby would get, and it criminalizes doctors who deliberately kill a live baby. Well, there's already a law. It's called first-degree murder. And the Democrats blocked it. Not just once, but 6 times. 6 times. Quite a weird, bizarre thing. Yes, come on over the border, all of you refugees, Latins, whatever. But, you know, you indigenous Americans, we're going to punch your babies out. Get rid of them as fast as we can. Over in Connecticut, there is a big stink. And that is because in the state girls indoor track championships, statewide, first and second place were taken by transgender students, boys who say they are transitioning to female. And parents are complaining, understandably. The genuine girl athletes are complaining and saying it is simply not fair. Now, the transgender community is out there saying, well, these transgenders, you know, they're taking drugs to lower their testosterone. That really doesn't make a difference because they have grown up since they were born through childhood and into young adulthood soaked in testosterone. It has made them taller, stronger, denser skeletons. The advantage is there and it cannot be taken out. And it's utterly ridiculous to ignore the reality that these transgenders shouldn't be competing against biological females. But it's politically correct. We're going to do the political correctness thing here. You're not being PC. You're anti-trans. No, I'm pro-common sense is really what I'm at. Now, we had a caller the other day who came on in and said, let's have 3 divisions, men's, women's, and the trans. But it is simply not fair to have biological males, which is what they are underneath all the hormone treatments and the surgery and everything. They're still biological males right down to the DNA. It is not fair to have them compete against biological females. And I feel sorry for those girls. I really do. They don't deserve to have this done to them. And what you know what's going to happen? Girls are going to stop going out for sports. They're just going to quit and say, why should I bother? Why should I go on out there to the track every day, run myself ragged, get all sweaty, have to do the shower, do the laundry when I get home? And why bother when there is no way I could possibly beat these transgender males? What a screwed up country we have become. But there is hope, because over in South Dakota, There is a bill under consideration that would force all transgender students to play on teams based on their birth certificate gender. In other words, if you were born a boy, you will compete with the boys. If you were born a girl, you compete with the girls. I think this is a great, great solution. And basically, they're trying to reverse the current policy, which allows students to play on sports teams in a manner consistent with their gender identity. So the big pushback is starting. All right, we're going to take another break for commercials, and we'll be right back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And we're seeing this very bizarre attempt to remake our culture and get us all confused about gender and gender identity. And I think it was mostly to keep us distracted from this rush toward war, to keep us distracted from taking a good look at what the government has been doing. As far as the gay community itself, the LGBTQ group, I think their biggest tactical mistake was they came on out, said, we want to be accepted. And everybody said, well, most people said, we accept you, because most people sort of have a live and let live kind of an attitude. Okay? Then the LGBTQ activists crossed a line and started literally trying to throw their lifestyle into everybody else's faces to provoke a reaction. And the reaction they got was negative, at which point they could scream, oh, you're a homophobe, you're a transphobe. That's a common liberal trick, to invade somebody's personal space in an aggressive way to provoke a response and then scream that you're the victim. That happened with the Covington kids over at the Lincoln Memorial. That Native American elder was just right in their face, just banging on his drum right in their face, trying to get a response so that he could play the victim again here. And there is a backlash, unfortunately, because when you push into people's space and you basically mentally assault them, they're going to fight back. And over on Staten Island, the organizers of the St. Patrick's Day Parade have refused an application from an LGBTQ group to march in the parade, basically saying that the LGBTQ promotes a homosexual lifestyle which goes against the tenets of the Catholic Church. And it is their parade, and it is their right. And again, I think they pushed too hard. The LGBTQ gender people pushed way too hard, and it created a backlash. Okay, let's take a phone call. Frank in North Carolina, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, Mike, have you heard anything about some court hearing or about making the women subject to a draft if a draft would occur?
Yeah, we reported on that yesterday. There was a judge that basically came on down and said a male-only draft is unconstitutional.
Okay, and that court case was brought forward by whom?
I don't have it in front of me right now, but I'm sure that you could do a web search on it and find it.
Okay, yeah, I gotta get around. I gotta get the web. I gotta get on the net. All right.
All right. Thanks an awful lot for the phone call. We're going to let you go. Everything that we talk about, of course, is at the whatreallyhappened.com website, and down at the very bottom of the page are buttons to take you to the previous page and the previous page and the previous page, so you can scroll back. Unfortunately, the search engine that we used to have inside the website is broken, but there's something else you can do. You can go on over, and I hate to use the word Google, but they're the only ones who do this. You can go to the Google search engine, and you can type out something like male-only draft unconstitutional. Then you type site, SITE : no space, whatreallyhappened.com. And Google will search through just whatreallyhappened.com for anything that matches that reference. It's a neat little trick. All right, getting into science and health here. Up in Washington State, they have high vaccination rates up there for the measles vaccine, but it's turning out the product is unable to provide lifetime immunity or vigorous passive maternal protection to infants during the first year of life. Now, when the measles vaccine was first introduced, most people over the age of 15 who had had wild, natural measles had lifetime immunity. In developed nations, like other communicable infections, measles was no longer dangerous except in rare circumstances because of inadequate nutrition, poor sanitation, lack of health care. But apparently, people who are being vaccinated for measles in Washington state are coming down with the measles. In fact, we were talking about how more people have died from the measles vaccine than from measles. And there was this article that said 100 deaths from the vaccine, 0 deaths from measles. And I had to say there was an update. And that took place in Washington state. There was a woman who got the measles vaccine, came down with measles immediately thereafter, and died from it. They're not really being very careful about the product, but they are concerned that people are talking about it, and YouTube has begun shutting down revenue streams for anti-vaccine videos. They're on the warpath against any messaging that questions the safety and efficacy of vaccines. You will get that needle stuck in your arm. Sig Heil, Sig Heil, Sig Heil. We'll be right back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And one of our listeners just emailed me that little trick I was talking about where you put a search string and then you type site, and a website you want searched. It's not unique to Google. Apparently, it also works at DuckDuckGo, Yandex, and Bing. So that's a handy little trick to know here to search through specific websites. All right, we're going to take a phone call here from Tom in Connecticut. Aloha, Tom. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
I had a little dispute with Frontier. They're the only game in town besides Spectrum. And I didn't want to go to satellite. So this dispute involved me sending back this equipment. I had 4 cable boxes and some other stuff that were actually taken over from AT&T because Frontier bought out AT&T in my area.
Yes.
So I'm looking at this bill and going back and forth with customer service. On hold, you're the 45th caller. We'll get to you whenever, right?
Yes.
So I finally get to a girl after I see the disputed amount, which was like $124, go up to $785. And I said, what accounts for this? What does this amount represent? Oh, it's unreturned equipment. I said, you sent me a shipping tag. Oh, don't you have receipt? I said, no. Why don't you have receipt and look it up yourself? I had to send it to Aiea somewhere. So I said, you're charging me that much money for obsolete equipment that's junk, that wasn't even Frontier's equipment anyway, and it's about 8 years old. And so she went. She was speechless. She had to. I'll get a supervisor. So minutes go by. I hung up. Found an email for the vice president of operations in my area. Sent off. They get back to me and they said, "Oh, that was a computer error."
Uh-huh.
And I said, like, would it have been found out if I sent that money in? What would have happened then? Oh, no, we've taken care of that. We'll settle your amount. And they took it down to like $85. But this is the crap they try and pull on people's mind-boggling.
Oh, yeah, they'll pad the bills and everything, and they figure the vast majority of customers are just going to pay the bill and go along with it. And they especially target the elderly this way, where there'll be all these spurious charges and whatnot. And if you call and challenge them on it, they'll say, oh, it was a computer mistake, we'll back it off. But, yeah, it's pretty ugly.
Well, that's my story for today, Michael. Take care.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go here. The phone lines are open again. We're talking about vaccinations. Now, Bill Gates, as you know, is a champion of miracles. And first it was the magic of software, and now it's the miracle of vaccines. And so he's out there grandstanding, and he thinks vaccines are good. He's got a very simplistic view of them. He thinks they're a miraculous intervention with unmitigated benefits and no downside. We know better, of course. And apparently the Gates Foundation's spreadsheet appears to have no room to tally the massive flood of vaccine injuries afflicting children worldwide. Despite abundant evidence, this damage is standing the vaccine risk-benefits calculus on its head and turning childhood into an extended round of Russian roulette. And what is apparent is that Bill Gates' vaccine philanthropy doesn't benefit ordinary people. It benefits corporations and stockholders who are laughing all the way to the bank, and certainly not the children and adults around the world who are bearing the brunt of unsafe vaccines. In fact, I think it would be worthwhile to take a look at just how much of Bill Gates' portfolio, or the foundation's portfolio, is invested in vaccine companies. Now, Dr. Arata Kochi, the World Health Organization's former director of malaria research, chose to call a spade in 2008 when he described the Gates Foundation as a cartel that suppresses diversity of scientific opinion and is accountable to no one other than itself. The World Mercury Project's campaign to restore child health has been documenting parents' first-hand accounts of serious adverse outcomes experienced by their children. And here's how bad it really is right now. 13% of U.S. children are on special education. 1 in 6 American children has a development disorder such as autism spectrum disorder. Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder affects nearly 11% of American children. 1 in 20 children under the age of 5 has epilepsy. Peanut allergies are now the most common cause of food-related death. Women who receive flu and Tdap vaccines during pregnancy are at greater risk of miscarriages and other problems. Pediatric autoimmune neuropsychiatric disorders associated with streptococcal or other infections, PANDAS or PANS, may affect as many as 1 in 200 children in the U.S., including up to 25% of children diagnosed with obsessive compulsive disorder and tic disorders. Pardon me. Sensory processing disorder often occurs with ADHD and ASD. In the United States, the infant mortality rate, including from sudden infant death syndrome, is double the rate that you find in other first world countries. In Africa, a comparative study in Guinea-Bissau found that infant mortality was at least twice as high in children who received the diphtheria, tetanus, pertussis, and polio vaccines as children who did not get those vaccines. Now, a few years ago, Japan ended the practice of mandatory vaccines for school children, and children's health has improved immeasurably. I get a real issue with that sudden infant death syndrome. They don't actually have a cause for it, or they're not admitting to a cause for it. It's just, whoops, all of a sudden your kid's dead. Golly, what a shame. Then they came up with that other one, shaken baby syndrome. And can you imagine parents who've just had their brand new baby die after getting all the required mandatory vaccines, and they're starting to ask, was there something in the vaccines? And all of a sudden, the authorities come in and say, no, you shook your baby to death. This is clearly shaken baby syndrome. And they have sent people to prison, all to protect corporate profitability. And if that isn't fascism, I don't know what is. All righty. A federal judge has approved a $1 billion, with a B, dollar lawsuit against Johns Hopkins University, Bristol Myers Squibb, and the Rockefeller Foundation. And the lawsuit is seeking restitution for victims who were intentionally infected with syphilis during government experiments in Guatemala during the 1940s. And this goes way beyond Tuskegee. Hundreds of Guatemalans were reportedly infected with syphilis during the studies, which were designed to test the ability of penicillin to treat sexually transmitted diseases. The lawsuit was pending in limbo for the past 4 years until it was finally approved by U.S. District Judge Theodore Chuang last month. In 2015, when the lawsuit was filed, there were 750 plaintiffs. Now there are only 444 and some remaining relatives. I guess the opposition was kind of hoping they could delay the lawsuit until everybody just died off here. We've been talking about glyphosate, how toxic it is, how it just seems to be everywhere, and people are getting very, very concerned. The World Health Organization has declared it a probable human carcinogen. Probably had Monsanto's lobbying not been so intense, they would have declared it a definite carcinogen. And now people are very worried because it's being used by every farm that has Roundup-ready crops. They have to use it. They can't go back to the other pesticides anymore. And it's getting into the crops, it's getting into the food, and apparently it is proving to be very, very difficult to remove. Or maybe the companies just aren't even trying. Because apparently there's a public interest advocacy group, US PIRG, that tested 5 wines and 15 beers, including organic ones, and found glyphosate in all but one. And the report acknowledged that the levels detected were below limits set by the EPA. But the results warrant some degree of public concern. And yes, they do, because we know that those limits that are set by government agencies are often done to allow corporations to do things. Remember that big scandal over that synthetic protein that was found in imported dog food from China? I'm forgetting the actual name of it. But it was in the dog food, and it wound up killing some dogs. And there was a big hue and cry about, oh, China was just loading up the dog food with all of this, well above the limit. And then it turned out American dog food manufacturers were doing exactly the same thing. And the FDA just raised the limit. We've seen the limits for radiation exposure get raised ever since Fukushima. It's a joke, really. All right, this next article is going to upset a lot of people, but it's nice that this is starting to get on out there. A lot of people have always asked, are the Jews a religion or a race? And the common answer is, well, whatever they need at that moment, that's what they are. But there has been some work done by an Israeli molecular geneticist, Dr. Al-Haik, and he's published this research and basically saying that there is no Jewish gene, that there is no common Middle East origin, especially the Ashkenazi, have nothing whatsoever to do with the ancient Hebrews. Judaism is a religion, and like most religion, it has basically proselytized and recruited among many different existing races. So this is kicking up a firestorm of debate, but the genetic evidence just isn't there to support the idea that there is a Jewish people any more than there's a Catholic people or a Protestant people. These are religions we're talking about. Now, the Ashkenazi are descendants of Central Asian Khazars who converted to Judaism about 800 AD. About 100 years later, Khazaria fell, and the Khazarian Jews migrated northward into Russia and westward into Europe. That's where the Ashkenazi come from. If you look at their skin, they don't look anything at all like they're Middle Eastern. Another story, this one's out of Global Research up in Canada. They do very good work. Apparently, Israeli professor Nadara Shalhoub-Kevorkian revealed yesterday that the Israeli occupation authorities issue permits to large pharmaceutical firms to carry out drug tests on Palestinian and Arab prisoners. The Hebrew University lecturer also revealed that the Israeli military firms are testing weapons on Palestinian children and carry out those tests in the Palestinian neighborhoods of occupied Jerusalem. And she collected that data while carrying out a research project for the Hebrew University. And she basically said, the Palestinian spaces are being used as laboratories. The invention of products and services of state-sponsored security corporations are fueled by long-term curfews and Palestinian oppression by the Israeli army. So Mengele would have been proud. He would have been proud. All right, so let's get into some other news, a little bit more local. As you know, we are still in the grip of a major winter. Puxatawny Phil blew the call. And fortunately, the good news is there was this Amtrak train that was stuck since Sunday with 183 passengers. They couldn't get to it. The snow was so deep. The train was stopped by a downed tree in Oregon. But now they've managed to get to it. The train is moving and they're on their way home. But it was kind of dire. They were running out of food. And apparently, along with the train, there's a 115-mile backup along the I-5 in Oregon because it's clogged with snow. Over in Great Britain, they're getting ready for another bee sting. They're going to have freezing fog to hit, minus 10 degrees centigrade, more snow expected next week. Now, this is a cool story. I think this is great. This happened in South Carolina. There was a Girl Scout troop stationed outside a Bi-Lo grocery store in Malden, South Carolina, and they were dealing with the cold. And so this unknown man just walks up and he literally buys every single cookie they have so that they can get out of the cold. $540 worth of Girl Scout cookies. I would have a few words with that troop leader about balancing the need between commerce and avoiding pneumonia in the little ones here. Over on Lake Erie, they're dealing with what's called an ice tsunami. And this is where ice is forming on Lake Erie, and there's a windstorm that basically piles it up along the shoreline across parts of New York. And ice mounds are like 25, 30 feet high. And some people's homes are at risk. Over at Carson Now, Joanne Skelly column, February brings abundance of snow and rain. And Joanne is pointing out that it's very obvious this winter is different. She writes, normally at this time of year, I would be reminding folks to water trees if they haven't had significant precipitation. Watering now would be an exercise in futility. I'm writing this after 24 inches of snow fell at our house, then 3 to 5 inches of rain, followed by another inch of snow with no end in sight. The good news is our plants are deeply watered. The bad news is I may have to crawl under the house to turn on the sump pump. Worst news would be if the creek overflows with all the runoff. And that's going to be an issue when the spring thaws come. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And the one of our listeners emailed. Excuse me a second. One of our listeners emailed in the name of that synthetic protein that was actually in pet food that was killing pets was melamine. I had another. Well, I'm going to get back to this one later. We're talking about human-caused global warming. It's not all downside, and there's sort of a line running around the heartland. There's no business like snow business because businesses that are involved in snow removal or towing, they're doing very well. Over in St. Cloud and Brainerd, they have the Collins Brother Towing. They're running 24 hours a day around the clock. They have 95 tow trucks in the fleet, 7 of which are in Brainerd, and they're just making huge business. Winch outs, rollovers, semis in the ditch, people stuck in their driveway, people stuck in parking lots. And so it's good business for there. Over in Elgin, they're running out of road salt. They've had so much snow and ice, they're literally running out of salt supplies. And that can be a problem when you listen to people like Al Gore who say the winter's going to be really mild, because then you sit in your city council meeting and you say, well, Al Gore says it's going to be a mild winter, so we don't need to buy and stockpile as much salt or grit as we did last year. And then they get caught. Now, West Dundee received 300 tons of salt, which represents the remaining amount allowable under West Dundee's joint purchasing contract this year. So it's a bit of a mess here. All right, article coming out of realclimatescience.com, the 5 top arguments against climate alarmism. And by the way, if you're following the corporate media, they're still trying to push this thing. 2018 was the 4th hottest year on record. Global warming is causing these cold winters. Ocasio-Cortez is out there saying we're all going to die in 12 years. Anyway, climate alarmism is based mainly around the fear of extreme weather, which is part of human nature. We're all afraid of things that go boom in the sky. And we have these ancient stories of giant floods and plagues, all of which are blamed on man's sins. And so climate alarmists like Al Gore tap into that primal fear, pushing that same idea of extreme weather caused by our carbon sins. So how religious can you get? Climate alarmism is much like the story of the emperor's new clothes. People may not see any evidence of catastrophic climate change or sea level rise, but their opinion is irrelevant because 97% of scientists believe we are doomed due to global warming. We'll be back after station identification. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. So we're talking about reasons to reject climate alarmism. And if you step back and take the wider view, getting you alarmed is part of the process of motivating you someplace. Saddam can attack us in 45 minutes with gas or something like that. Get you alarmed. Get you into that emotional state of fear so that you're not thinking clearly. So getting on back to the reasons to avoid climate alarmism, let's be honest, academics have been making apocalyptic predictions for decades. All have failed miserably, and yet they keep doing it over and over again. Had all of these dire predictions of doom by scientists actually been correct, we wouldn't be here now to have this discussion. That's always a good point to bring up here. And part of it is driven by the nature of science itself. Because if you're working in a laboratory and you say, I have discovered this interesting phenomenon and it probably doesn't mean all that much, nobody's going to pay attention to you. You won't get your face on TV. You may not get any more funding. But if you say, I have found this interesting little phenomenon and it could potentially be the end of the world, then you're going to get TV cameras in your face. The funding is going to pour on in. And it does distort the science, unfortunately. Now, climate alarmism is completely dependent on graphs and useless climate models generated by a small handful of people. The graphs are generated through scientifically corrupt processes of data tampering and hiding data. We saw this with the ClimateGate scandal out of the Hadley Climate Research Unit at the University of East Anglia, was a leak of internal letters and source code showing how they were trying to hide the decline. Because in the 1990s, when they started this whole thing about global warming, the world really was warming. Then as we got into the 2000s, Mother Nature pulled a fast one and the Earth started cooling. and it's been cooling ever since. So they tried to retool and say, well, we're not calling it global warming anymore, we're calling it climate change. And then everybody said, well, the climate changes anyway, so what's the big deal there? So they retooled again and said, it's climate disruption. You humans are disrupting the climate. How dare you do that? The most important argument against climate alarmism is that the proposed solutions are unworkable, dangerous, and useless. They are made without consulting engineers. They have zero chance of success. A robust discussion about our energy future is needed, but that discussion is censored in favor of propaganda and making a buck as fast as possible here. And a good example of the climate hype is this article that came out of the Daily Mail, which very often has, articles that are designed to excite and alarm. Low-level clouds that cover the oceans could disappear in the next century as a result of rising CO2 levels and cause climate change to spiral out of control, study claims. And on and on and on. Meanwhile, Al Gore took a swipe at Trump, saying that the real national emergency is climate change, and saying that climate change-related droughts in Central America are to blame for the migrant caravans bound for the United States. Well, not anymore. With wars and rumors of war, I'm sure those migrants are coming up here to hopefully not get shot. But again, don't forget, they were lured here. They were told there is going to be free stuff here, and they got free stuff. The U.S. government treats these illegal immigrants better than it treats our, shall we say, homeless veterans. Okay, so let's talk about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and her Green New Deal, and everybody's out there talking about how much it's going to cost and whether it's really workable. Certainly the part where she wants to build a bridge from the mainland to here in Hawaii, that's a non-starter. And that means that the idea of not having any more airplanes is a non-starter. Besides which, no country on earth is going to give up its military warplanes. And the ultra-rich aren't going to give up their private jets. It's just not going to happen. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez just wants ordinary middle-class people to give up flying from one side of the country to the other in 3 hours in favor of taking a train that might be a couple of days. Not that train travel is necessarily bad. I enjoyed taking the trains in Europe, but I digress here. But again, where is the money going to come for all of this? I mean, I've heard estimates of this, $90 trillion with a T, 90 trillion. And a lot of it, it's not going to stop climate change, because climate changes all by itself. And that's just a big part of the problem. They don't understand. Climate changes all by itself. There is nothing they can do until the liberals can control the Earth's orbit and put a thermostat on the sun. Climate will always change. Now, Kamala Harris, of course, is on board with the Green New Deal. She won't talk about what it's going to cost, either for that or Medicare for All, but saying it's not about a cost, it's about an investment. Boy, there's a red warning flag. Anytime a politician is getting ready to really put the screws to the taxpayer, they say it's not a cost, it's an investment. We'll get something back down the road. Amazing. All right, we're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. And just when you think the global warming cultists could not get any stranger, apparently their latest villain is toilet paper. That we all shouldn't be using so much toilet paper because, we're deforesting. Well, first of all, toilet pulp is grown in tree forests that are replanted and grown again and grown again. It is sustained. But I guess the global warming people now want us to use our fingers and wash our hands before we shake hands with anybody. But that's literally where they are right now. They want limits on our toilet paper. It's amazing here. Do you remember the big deal about the dirty diesel scandal? And it resulted in lawsuits and a lot of attacks on foreign automakers. Well, the government may have somehow messed up because there is new independent research showing that some of the latest diesel cars on sale today produce no or next to nothing harmful nitrogen oxides associated with causing tens of thousands of premature deaths in Britain each year. And a Mercedes-Benz family saloon with a diesel engine tested on the road by German monitoring group ADAC was found to produce no harmful NOx pollution during controlled measurements. BMW Estate and a Vauxhall Astra were recorded as emitting just 1 milligram of NOx per kilometer, significantly below the legal threshold of 168 milligrams per kilometer. So this brings into question the continued demonization of diesel by ministers at home and around the world that have resulted in a monumental downturn for the diesel industry. Well, I'll tell you what's one place you might want to look is the petroleum-based industry that stands apart from the companies that produce diesel fuel. As the economy tightens up and we get into recession, we're literally going to enter a period of corporate warfare where corporations are literally going to try and find ways to wreck other competing corporations, to take their markets away from them, to sabotage them, to undermine them, hostile takeovers. All right, let's talk about the church and clergy sex abusers. The Pope just got done with this huge summit at the Vatican on pedophilia. And there was a lot of talk and a lot of verbiage, but some interesting stuff came on out. Pope Francis has vowed to confront clergy sex abusers with the wrath of God, and he compared their actions to human sacrifice. I'm not entirely sure that's inappropriate, because somebody who abuses sexually a child, they are certainly sacrificing a part of that child, their youth and their innocence. So the words were a little strong, but he made the remarks during a mass in Vatican City to conclude the summit on preventing clergy sex abuse, which should be by ending sex abuse by the clergy. And Pope Francis also pledged to end the cover-ups by their superiors and prioritize victims of this brazen, aggressive, and destructive evil. And great if it actually does happen. But we have seen in the past where something will happen and the church sexual abuse scandal breaks into the open, breaks into the media, and high church officials will say, well, this time we're going to do something about it, and then it doesn't happen. One of the things that came out from the summit, however, is that along with children, Catholic priests regularly abuse the nuns. And apparently that was also being covered up. This is happening all over the globe. One of the nuns said she was forced to have 3 abortions after being abused for years by a priest who beat her, while another said she had been molested more than 100 times. I got to question that number here. But the Vatican expresses shame and sorrow over sexual abuse by U.S. priests, and the Pope admitted that, yes, there's been sexual abuse of nuns by priests and the bishops. Now, another point of view is coming out of spiritualvigor.com, saying that the Catholic Church is nowhere close to confronting the global epidemic of child sex abuse by priests. And they're saying that Pope Francis is actually in retreat from any meaningful effort to bring abusers to justice. So, now, here's where you start to realize part of the problem. A top Catholic cardinal admitted on Saturday that church files on priests who sexually abused children were destroyed or never even written, which allowed pedophile priests to continue to prey on others. This is coming from German Cardinal Reinhard Marx. He said it in a speech at the Vatican Summit tackling pedophilia. And he said, instead of the perpetrators, the victims were regulated and silence imposed on them. The stipulated procedures and processes for the prosecution of offenses were deliberately not complied with, but instead canceled or overridden. At least it's really out in the open. I remember when this stuff first began to surface, and there was always this, oh, you can't talk about the church like that. You know, you can't talk about the church like that. And it's just one or two bad apples in there. No, it's an epidemic. And it's not just the Catholics. I'm not just picking on the Catholics here. Cardinal Sean O'Malley of Boston wants to see a report from the Vatican detailing who knew what and when about Theodore McCarrick, who was once among the most influential men of the church in the United States, and as of last Saturday, an ex-priest found guilty of sexual sins with both minors and adults. O'Malley said he believes that report will include information sent to the Holy See by the 4 dioceses where McCarrick served, meaning New York, Metuchen, Newark, and Washington, D.C. As Richard Nixon used to say, it isn't the crime, it's the cover-up that gets you. 2 Catholic cardinals are trying to shift the blame, saying it's not the clerics and the priests here, it's homosexuality. You know, that's the sin, that's the blame. Now, Pope Francis has analyzed the problem as a structural and cultural one that he calls clericalism. All righty. Down in Australia, Cardinal George Pell has been found guilty of sexual offenses against children, making him the highest-ranking Catholic figure to receive such a conviction. Pell abused 2 choir boys in Melbourne's cathedral in 1996. He had pled not guilty. And as Vatican treasurer, the 77-year-old Australian was widely seen as the church's 3rd most powerful official. Now, Pell has lodged an appeal. Now, the trial was actually heard last year, but he's facing even more charges in a new trial, and it was thought that reporting on the first guilty verdict might prejudice a potential jury pool. So there was basically Australia's equivalent of the D notice was put on out saying this is not to be reported of, but apparently journalists did. They broke the Pell suppression, and they could face jail terms now. Meanwhile, over in Germany, police have admitted to losing almost all the incriminating digital evidence against 2 pedophiles accused of sexually assaulting at least 31 children as young as 4. That's somebody... That's one heck of a goof. They don't have backup tapes. I think one of the suspects is somehow connected here. All right, here's another case of political correctness, and this has to do with what's called the Bladensburg Cross. Now, the Bladensburg Cross is actually a war memorial. It's a World War I monument to fallen soldiers, and apparently lawsuits have been filed to have it destroyed by the American Humanist Association. They want to tear it down, contending its Latin cross shape violates the No Establishment Clause of the First Amendment. Well, the No Establishment Clause says we may not make a law respecting an establishment of religion. Just having the symbol up there as a war memorial, I don't think that crosses that line. Apparently, one of the people trying to negotiate this will say, well, we could just slice the arms of the cross off and leave the rest of the memorial, which I think would be a horrible insult. And I know I take a lot of criticism because I'm not a believer, but I want to make a point here. I would never belong to this American Humanist Association because they strike me as insecure in their atheism. They're not really sure. And so their mission is to go on out and, just like the LGBTQ people, they want to force their worldview into everybody else's face. And my attitude is, I know what I don't believe in. Whatever you want to believe in is fine as long as you're not using it to hurt somebody. And I don't know why we can't get along with an attitude like that. But this is a World War I monument to fallen soldiers. And it's like another attack on our history. Out in California, as you know, they're dealing with some incredible weather. And now they've got another dam that is not doing too well. The U.S. Geological Survey is warning that a rare storm event known as an arc storm could flood the Central Valley. It's known as a 900-year storm because it has a 1 in 900 chance of happening every year. A similar storm in 1861 dumped 36 inches of rain on Los Angeles and rendered it impossible to cross California's Central Valley without a boat. Well, the problem is now that there is a decaying dam that is in the way of much of that water, rather. And if there were to be a 900-year storm before that dam can be strengthened, it could basically build up a huge head of water and then let go, and 20 feet of flood water would pour into the Los Angeles area. And Army engineers are pleading with the federal government to give them the resources to avert a crisis. And the government is saying, we're too busy attacking Venezuela. Call us later. All right, we're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And over in Japan, as you know, they're getting ready for the Olympics in 2020. It's going to be an interesting year between our elections and the Olympic. And Japan is calling on its citizens to help collect old electronics in order to create 100% recycled Tokyo Olympic medals. And I think that's a very cool thing to do. It's symbolic largely, but it's a very, very cool thing to do. And a lot of people have misconceptions about the medals, the gold, the silver, and the bronze. Early on, when they were very small, yes, they were gold, silver, and bronze. But as the medals got larger so the cameras could see them, they're plated. And as a matter of fact, I did a project for the Bishop Museum here locally, and I got to see close up Duke Kahanamoku's Olympic medals, and they unfortunately had badly deteriorated. I don't think they're really made to last all that long. But anyway, it'd be interesting to see the Olympics. All right, NASA is now out there talking about wanting commercial lunar delivery services as soon as possible. And last November, the agency tagged 9 American companies as eligible to bid on delivering robotic NASA payloads to the moon via commercial lunar payload services contracts. And on February 14th, Valentine's Day, NASA officials announced the first task order for such a delivery will likely come out in a month or so, and that flight is expected to follow in relatively short order, meaning this calendar year. Now, that will be amazing. That basically is telling me the companies that are being approached are already in the business of looking at being able to send things to the moon. So great that we're going back to the moon. Now, Israel basically is about to become the first country to land a privately financed spacecraft on the moon. It's named Bereshit, which is Hebrew for Genesis. It was one of the payloads carried aloft by Elon Musk's rockets last Friday. And this lander weighs about 1,200 pounds. It's a big one. It's going to be doing some basic research. One of the interesting things in it is this 25-layer disk on which is very finely encoded just millions and millions and millions of pages of human history and technology, and the idea being that it will be safe on the moon for eternity, which unfortunately, sadly, given the lunar environment, is not likely to be true. But again, great symbolism. So, good luck to all those kids who are guiding this thing. And supposedly, it's going to touch down on the moon sometime in April. It's taking a long, slow orbit out there. And so, great. I think that's wonderful here. The Japanese probe Hayabusa 2 has fired this sampling bullet into the surface of the Ryugu asteroid. It is hoping to retrieve organic material that will be brought back to Earth and analyzed. So it used this device called a sampler horn to fire a tantalum projectile bullet, breaking off tiny fragments that are then collected and brought home for analysis. Scientists are on the lookout for amino acids or other organic molecules among the carbon-rich materials that make up C-type asteroids like Ryugu, compounds which could have given rise to the first life on Earth under the right reactive conditions. Well, the author of this article is clearly caught up in this theory of panspermia, that life didn't evolve here on Earth, that it was seeded from someplace else, which is basically, it's divine intervention only in the form of an alien. It is known from many experiments that amino acids form spontaneously in the presence of the necessary raw materials and an energy source. That's been established. So if they're forming out there on that asteroid, they're also forming here on Earth. And so I don't think there is any evidence to support this theory of panspermia. I think the life that we have here on planet Earth basically belongs here, and it evolved here, and it's very comfortable because it evolved here. But still, it's a major achievement for Japan to have landed on this asteroid and to be bringing back another piece of material from another body in our solar system. Because as we get more and more materials from around the solar system, we begin to discover that meteorites that have already crashed to Earth, we can identify where they come from. We now know that many meteorites are actually broken off from the moon, from impacts with other objects knocking them loose, because of the very good analysis of the Martian rocks from the Viking landers and all the rovers. We've identified meteors here on Earth that we know came from the red planet. There are probably meteors here that came from Mercury. There may be meteors here that came from the moons of the gas giants. And we're going to start finding out. We're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And let's see. Over at Mount Etna, they're starting to get a little bit nervous over there because explosive activity is taking place at Etna's northeast crater. And this started acting up at February 18th. And it was enough to force a partial airport closure. So the Earth is rocking and rolling. There was an article that came through here the other day where apparently Japanese volcanologists are concerned that Mount Fuji, which has been dormant for quite a long time, may be on the verge of an eruption there. And of course, Japan being islands, they've built right up to the sides of that volcano. And if it were to erupt, and it has erupted in historic times, that would not be good. And over at Yellowstone, there is a concern that that supervolcano may be twitching. And part of it has to do with the fact that the geysers all around the basin are becoming more active. And one of the ones that really caught attention was the Steamboat geyser, which is the tallest geyser in the world. But for the longest time, it would only erupt rarely. I mean, months, sometimes years. And then last year, it started erupting as often as once a week. Now, this is not a guaranteed sign of an imminent eruption. It may just be that erosion in the plumbing system, if you will, is making it behave more differently. But a lot of people are very, very concerned about what could happen. I mean, let's be very honest. If the Yellowstone supervolcano were to erupt, it's basically pretty much the western half of the country is going to be gone, and a good chunk of Canada as well. And the concern is they're still trying to figure out how large that magma chamber is underneath it. And every time they do another study with more powerful equipment, they see that it goes down further and it's larger. And more alarming, it does look like the top of it is moving upward. Slowly, but definitely moving upward. So, Yellowstone is a beautiful place. I'm glad I've been there. But obviously, we have to be concerned. Volcanoes do erupt. And from our position, we've never seen a supervolcano in historic times. That's the harsh reality. I mean, we've seen the little volcanoes like Mount St. Helens. Now they're realizing that there actually is a supervolcano system underneath the southern end of Italy. And they don't know what's going to happen with that. But the Earth is rocking and rolling, and all we can do is hang on and enjoy the ride. Alrighty. Over at the University of Southern California, Jeb Barnes, who's with the College of Letters, Arts, and Sciences, is out there saying that asbestos litigation is not going to go away. And you've probably seen the TV commercials. And the height of asbestos consumption was in the 1970s, and asbestos litigation began over a half century ago. Many of its leading manufacturers and mining companies are long gone. I remember when I had a little chemistry setup in my home workshop, and I had a little asbestos pad that I used to help heat the beakers and everything. But apparently litigation, asbestos is back in the news, and this gets back to Johnson & Johnson. And in July of last year, they were ordered to pay $4.69 billion with a B for failing to warn customers that its baby powder contained asbestos. Now, asbestos does occur sometimes in talcum. They're both mined minerals. You mine them, you grind them up. The thought would be that Johnson & Johnson, as it mined the talc, would be testing for the presence of asbestos and simply discard the talc that had it, because we're not talking expensive materials here. It's not like we're talking silver or gold or anything. It's basically junk rock. But apparently Johnson & Johnson didn't bother. They took the talc that had the asbestos, threw it into the bin with the pure talc, and put it in the baby powder. And yeah, they should get whacked real hard. Okay. Here's a good one for those of you who like to go out to Grand Canyon. Apparently out the Grand Canyon, tourists were exposed to radiation 4,000 times the safe limit for 2 decades from uranium stored in 3 buckets in a museum. And the park tried to cover it up after they were removed. Well, I can understand why. That's a huge negligent issue. 2 decades. And apparently this Elston Swede Stephenson, the park's safety, health, and wellness manager, warned of possible health consequences to staff and public from these 3 5-gallon buckets of uranium ore, which he claims were stored next to a taxidermy exhibit from 2000 until June 18th, 2018. And Stephenson revealed the information in a rogue email to staff after bosses failed to issue any information on the exposure for 8 months. Let's see. I think I remember that taxidermy exhibit from when I was there. So Stevenson now believes top management are involved in a cover-up and says he's now been cut off from all information about the exposure. But he's saying if you were in the museum collections building between the year 2000 and June 18th, 2018, you were exposed to uranium by OSHA's definitions. Well, we get our exposure out here from Fukushima. Okay, what goes up must come down. The Soviet Union launched the Cosmos 482 Venus probe on March 31st, 1972. But while the Soviet Union had a lot of good luck with Venus, this one wasn't part of it. The spacecraft messed up its rocket-powered escape from Earth orbit. In other words, the transition rocket failed. And it's been up there ever since. Well, now it's space junk. And experts are predicting it's going to come down very soon, probably as early as this year. So keep your eyes open for the skies. A few months back, we had something come down off the south here, deorbiting at nighttime here. Curiosity has unfortunately suffered another glitch. It recovered from it, but it's beginning to show its age. And Curiosity, every once in a while, goes through what's called an inactive period, which is they shut it down and then they turn it on and it reboots. But apparently, this one time, there was a glitch that triggered a protective safe mode. And after a weekend of inactivity, Mission Control brought the rover back online. But it doesn't mean Curiosity is out of the weeds just yet. And of course, a lot of people are saying, you know, what a tragic coincidence, just weeks after NASA gave up hope on bringing back Opportunity, the rover there. Okay, you're going to love this one. Over in India, I love this. Licensed opium farmers in the state of Madhya Pradesh are facing the menace of drug-addicted parakeets right at the time when crops are at the stage of ripening. And the farmers are still reeling from damages to their standing crops from adverse weather conditions. Now they're being forced to contend with addicted parrots stealing their produce. The parrots hover over fields from day to night, and when an opportunity presents itself, they suck out the opium sap from the crops. Some brazen birds even pluck off whole poppy pods and fly away with them, causing permanent damage, permanent loss to the farmers. So now you know when parakeets go bad. Claire's laughing in the other room. Well, you might be surprised how many animals enjoy getting high. There are cases where deer and moose will wait for apples on a tree to start to rot, at which point they're fermenting and producing alcohol. And then they'll eat the fruit and they'll get drunk. So substance abuse is not unique to humans. Everybody does it. Everybody does it. Ever wonder why dogs love chocolate so much? For us humans, it makes us feel we're in love because of the neurotransmitter phenethylamine. But it gets dogs high. I mean, seriously stoned. And you got to be careful because they'll just go on eating it until they OD. Got to be careful with that chemistry out there. All right. Apparently, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is supporting Trump and Pence on the regime change plans for Venezuela. So she's all out there, hunky-dory, we're going to go, we're going to have fun. It's a mess here. I'm going to take a look here and see if they've completed the vote on the national emergency over in the House of Representatives. Okay, here we go. And let's see. The New York Times is telling me I've got to subscribe to get the numbers. Anyway, it looks like they did pass the bill. Yeah, so they did. And again, I want to make a point here. The United States is getting ready to go to war with Venezuela. And if Bolton is any indication, they're going back into Nicaragua again and back into Cuba again. And the people in both Nicaragua and Cuba and Venezuela have very long memories, and they remember what U.S. interventions are like. And so probably all of these countries' military will be sending agents to infiltrate the United States, to sabotage weapons systems, to cause mayhem. And here you have the Democrats who want that border wide open, saying there is no sign of a crisis or national emergency. Yeah, there is. There is war coming to our hemisphere. The wars aren't just on the other guy's side of the planet. They're starting up right here. They're not all that far. Cuba is only 90 miles from Florida. I think this is just, it illustrates the utter insanity that politics has become in this country, where everybody is just obsessed and focused on their one little agenda. Open borders, open borders, open borders. And they're oblivious to everything else. Nobody's maintaining an overview and saying, guys, we have to do this. We have to deal with some unpleasant realities. If the Democrats block the wall, if they keep those borders open, and we start wars in Venezuela, Nicaragua, and Cuba, I guarantee that we're going to see asymmetric warfare coming into this country. We're going to see Venezuelans, Nicaraguans, and Cubans just walk across the border, and the Democrats will be there with a voter registration card for them, so they can get a driver's license so they can drive to whatever it is they want to blow up. Sabotage during wartime is a very real situation. I'm surprised we haven't seen it happen already from over in the Middle East. But in this case, we're dealing with potential saboteurs who will blend right in with the migrant horde. You ever stop to think about that one? All nations close their borders in wartime. This just does not make any new sense whatsoever, unless the Democrats want the United States to lose the war. Maybe they dream of a whole new country they're going to set up, a liberal, utopian paradise where we'll all play with our Play-Doh and pop our little bubble wrap and keep trying to figure out which restroom we're supposed to use. All right. Over at activistpost.com, they have an article basically saying that the Green New Deal is really an outgrowth or a repackage of Agenda 30. Now, Agenda 30 was this UN program, very clearly globalist in nature, which called for getting rid of private automobiles, except for the ultra-rich and the politically connected, huge investments in mass transportation, investments in renewable energy, and just that whole package of totalitarian, tyrannical, dictatorial control over all the world's population from a central ruling body. And I'm very much opposed to that. And if you look at the Green New Deal, it embodies a lot of what's in Agenda 30. But they're trying to repackage it, and they're trying to make it look attractive by giving it the aura of being Franklin Roosevelt reborn. So, from its inception in 1992 at the UN's Earth Summit, 50,000 delegates, heads of state, diplomats, and non-governmental organizations have hailed Agenda 21, which is now Agenda 30 because it's delayed, as the comprehensive blueprint for the reorganization of human society. That's what they're talking about, a complete top-down redo. Of course, we don't know what that blueprint has. For all we know, it could look like George Lucas THX 1138. But the reorganization will be dictated through all-encompassing policies affecting every aspect of our lives, using environmental protection as the excuse to pull at our emotions and get us to voluntarily surrender our liberties. Section 1 details social and economic dimensions of the plan, including redistribution of wealth to eradicate poverty, maintain health through vaccinations and modern medicine, and population control. Now, they've already stumbled on that maintain health through vaccinations because that's not working on out. And I'll tell you right now, the ultra-rich are not going to go along with redistribution of their wealth to eradicate poverty. So what Agenda 30 is talking about is taking the wealth from middle classes around the world and giving it to the lower classes. And did you ever stop to think that everybody given an absolutely equal fair start, they're not going to have a tie ending? There are just too many differences in us. Some people are rich because that's what they want to be. Other people are less rich because it's just not that important to them. Other people are less rich than that because they just want to take life easy. It is the big failing of liberalism that they think they can basically rewrite our brains along with everything else, and it's just not so. So, to introduce the plan, the Earth Summit Chairman Maurice Strong boldly proclaimed current lifestyles and consumption patterns of the affluent middle class, I told you that's who they were targeting, involving meat intake, use of fossil fuels, appliances, air conditioning, and suburban housing are not sustainable, meaning it must be stopped. They want to take us all back to the Middle Ages. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're talking about Agenda 21, which is now being called Agenda 30, because it has fallen behind on its schedule. And apparently, one of the NGOs that was supporting Agenda 30 was the Sierra Club. And David Brower of the Sierra Club said childbearing should be a punishable crime against society unless the parents hold a government license. I'm seeing a certain enforceability issue on that one. Leading environmental groups advocated that the Earth could only support a maximum of 1 billion people, which led famed Dr. Jacques Cousteau to declare, in order to stabilize world populations, we must eliminate 350,000 people per day. Well, good World War ought to do that for you. Section 2 of the agenda provides for the conservation and management of resources for development by outlining how environmental protection was to be the main weapon, including global protection of the atmosphere, land, mountains, oceans, and fresh water, all under the control of the United Nations. Now, I have an inside source at the United Nations, and they're telling me that it's totally corrupt. Just with, sort of being a hub for the Earth's nations. Can you imagine how corrupt they would be if they were in charge of it all? Going on with Section 2 of Agenda 30. To achieve such global control to save the planet, it is necessary to eliminate national sovereignty and independent nations. Eliminating national borders quickly led to the excuse for openly allowing the natural migration of peoples. Boy, we're certainly seeing that in our southern border. Europe is seeing it. They're putting this agenda into effect. And you know what I'm predicting? They're going to stumble and fall because they've got very lofty goals and unrealistic expectations. And the only way any of this would work is if human beings are all saints and we are not, especially those at the top. The UN Commission on Global Governance clearly outlined the goal for global control, saying the concept of national sovereignty has been an immutable, indeed a sacred principle of international relations. It is a principle which will yield only slowly and reluctantly to the new imperatives of global environmental cooperation. Well, you know that George Soros has been pushing that. And that pretty much explains why the supporters of such a goal go a little off the rail when a presidential candidate makes his campaign slogan, "Make America Great Again." Now, the main propaganda weapon for the agenda was the threat of environmental Armageddon, that if we didn't do as we were told, we were all going to die. Reference Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's comment that that if we don't address climate change right now, the world will end in 12 years. So, and again, they were screaming about global warming in the 1990s. We've had several cold winters since then. It is clear they don't actually understand what's going on. And there continues to be no evidence of any man-made effect on the climate. So they're really moving forward with this, even though they're already stumbling with it. They're moving forward. Okay, there's the music. Time for me to get out of here. I got things I got to get done today. So stay tuned for John Stedmiller. I'm sure he's got lots to share with you. Take what you learn here, share it with everybody that you know, and please donate to RBN, donate to whatreallyhappened.com, and we'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.